I would argue that people are pretty damn concerned right now about what's happening in this country on many levels. With 40 million people unemployed, with a pandemic, with insurrection, people are concerned, and I don't blame them. I am. And I think there is certainly refuge to be found in precious metals, and the lowest common denominator is in silver. And it allows you not only capital preservation, it allows you privacy, but it also allows you the ability to be nimble and to barter and to have options when others have none.
Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. And once again, amazing how quickly a week goes by, because it is time for the physical silver and gold market update with the great Andy Schectman of Miles Franklin. Andy, great to have you on here again this week. I hear your phone buzzing, so I appreciate you making some time. And how are you doing, sir?
You know, Chris, I'm good, brother. It's good to hear your voice again, and it's always good to be here. I don't know, man. It's a surreal world we find ourselves in. If I would have made a bet with you last year, what comes first? Gold goes to 2,000 or oil goes to negative 40. I wonder what your bet would have been. And by the same token, I'm living at a time where 20 minutes east of my house, the damn police station got burnt to the ground last night. 3rd precinct here in Minneapolis.
Wow.
Target stores, grocery stores, pharmacies, boarded up and or in flames and or destroyed by mobs of very angry people. And, you know, it's a very, very interesting time, not only socially, morally, but also economically, Chris. And I think these discussions that you and I have are growing with importance every day, and it's certainly my honor to be here with you. So thanks for having me on again today.
Well, I appreciate that, and certainly I just started hearing and reading about what's going on there in the last couple of hours, and not sure what to say except maybe to send prayers out there. There's some days where it is kind of tough when you see all these different things that are going on, and you know, and fortunately, I guess we can just do what we know how to do and at least cover and give some insight into the financial preparations. And anyway, so in terms of the gold and silver, which, you know, people have been really buying a lot more of ever since Corona began, I thought it would be interesting. You mentioned that people are buying a lot more silver than gold. We've talked about that a little bit before, but I think you said it's even as much as 3 to 1. And I wondered if you could comment, especially because at some point, you know, it's fine to talk about what we think the gold to silver ratio should be, but eventually if they're finite supply and they're buying them at a certain ratio, that is interesting. So if you could take it from there, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, they say there is no bull market like a gold bull market for one reason, Chris, and that is that equity markets speak to our desire to make money. They speak to our greed. Precious metals bull markets speak to our concern and to our fear. And the crazier the world gets, or the higher the price of the metals get, only reinforces people's fear and concern. So as it pertains to silver, I would argue that people are pretty damn concerned right now about what's happening in this country on many levels. With 40 million people unemployed, with a pandemic, with insurrection, people are concerned, and I don't blame them. I am. And I think there is certainly refuge to be found in precious metals, and the lowest common denominator is in silver. And it allows you not only capital preservation, It allows you privacy, but it also allows you the ability to be nimble and to barter and to have options when others have none. I think that people are waking up to that and realizing that gold is wonderful to protect your wealth on the larger scale, but certainly having the utility of silver, purchasing an investment that arguably is the most undervalued commodity on the planet. I don't have to tell you that. And also giving utility.
I literally wrote the book.
Yeah, I understand that. At the same time, it's killing two birds with one giant stone in that not only does it allow you to participate in arguably the most undervalued asset in history. And I say that to you not as a salesman, but as it just being straight out objective. But not only that, give you utility in times of great uncertainty. And if you lived through what I saw here last night in Minneapolis, potential for insurrection, when we look at what the Fed has done and the Treasury destroying our currency, who's to say that we're not bartering 6 months from now? Is it any more unlikely that that would happen than oil hitting negative 40 last month? I don't know. I mean, everything is upside down right now. And I just simply think that people are waking up, Chris, to what silver has to offer, not only from its potential as an investment, but also from its utility and what it can do to help people protect themselves and their families and get ahead of what seems to be accelerating down the pike straight at us.
Well, it's interesting what you mentioned there, and maybe today we won't hold back. I know there will be some folks who say, well, he's saying that because he's selling silver. Chris is saying this or that. Although I guess just in being completely honest, this is just my feeling. I don't know that I can prove this, but I listen to a lot of different folks, obviously, different people on the show, and there's just parts of what is happening that seems hard to see that it's not at least some parts of it planned or intentional. And so when you mention that about could we be bartering in a couple of months, on one hand, I mean, I sit here talking and reading about silver nonstop and what would eventually happen, yet it still seems unbelievable. But then yet when I think about look at what happened in in fact, I was listening to Greg Manarino, one of his calls today, and he was talking about how he's like, people are wondering if there's going to be a reset. And he's like, well, it already happened. And when you look at how life has changed, and again, to be clear, I hope it comes across. The last thing I want to do is, and I don't think it's a matter of scaring anyone, but just, and that's why I think, that's why I've focused. I mean, even years before we were doing this, I was, even back on the trading floor days, I was talking nonstop about gold and silver because you saw this coming eventually. And yeah, when you see negative $40 oil, or that people can't go to a store, or the unfortunate things in Minnesota, and maybe that's not even.
How about interest rates? The federal funds rate has gone negative on the futures market into January. All of these things, Chris, all of these things are happening, and nothing bothers me more than when people say he's just saying that shit because he sells it. That's not true. You don't stay in business for 30 years without a customer complaint being full of shit. And I'm sorry for swearing. I know some people don't like that, but I think let's just be frank. Yeah, let's just be frank. I don't speak. I do $250 to $300 million a year in sales. I don't need to placate. I don't need to tell people to buy silver just because I sell it. If that's what people want to think, so be it. I don't care. Bothers me. But furthest thing from the truth. Suspend all of your beliefs right now as it pertains to what my business is, and ask yourself, what commodity can you buy that is a third of what it was priced at in 1980? Show me one, and I'll buy you an ounce of silver. You can't. And, these things are happening. And when you see a police precinct burn down in Minneapolis, just 5 miles east of the University of Minnesota. I don't know, Chris. These things are to me real, and maybe more so than they've ever been. And so I think people can look at this that way, with skepticism and with the feeling that I'm just trying to peddle my wares, or they can take me at my face value, which I hope they do. In 30 years and $6 billion of transactions, I've never been more concerned for the future of this country, for the future of my family, and my business, and how things play out. And I think to protect yourself is warranted. It's just like anything. Preparing for anything is done reluctantly, but when it happens, you're damn glad you prepared. And if it didn't, you say, damn it, I knew I should have done that. It's the whole premise of life rafts on a boat. And that's why people died on the Titanic, because it was unsinkable. And they figured they didn't need to make as many life rafts for the boat. So anyways, the bottom line is that I think people need to blow up their life raft right now. You could argue that the USS Dollar is already taking on water.
Yeah, I mean, there's a nice big swimming pool on that ship. In fact, although I'll go a step further, and we can hash out the details of this later, although, as I think folks know, I bring for customers who are looking for gold and silver to you, and I receive compensation for that. And Andy, I'd be happy to commit right now, while we're not live on the air, but this will go on the show. If you could withhold 10% of whatever I earn and just put that into the best form of silver. Again, before you and I were talking, or before we hit the record button, we were talking about buying options on silver miners and different ways to do that. So I get what you're saying, and for the most part, the majority of the people really appreciate you coming on here. So I won't get us all riled up today. Although a few more before we let you run. It was interesting. I'd love to hear your comment on this. Craig Hemke had an article, then he talked about it with Eric Sprott, and I discussed the same thing with Dave Kranzler. It seems like there's a historic amount of gold standing for delivery at the Comex this month. Again, I had Andrew McGuire on this week. I talked to everyone outside of Santa Claus about what's going on, and it's not just you. Everybody who's been following this seems to be on high alert. Any thoughts on that, especially the deliveries on the Comex?
Yeah, well, it's vultures circling, and I think the Comex was exposed in April, when 35,000 or so contracts stood for delivery, and they had to go and rewrite the rules and change what was acceptable for delivery. At that moment, I knew the game was nearing an end. It's kind of like, I'll use a football analogy. When in football, the cornerback who's guarding one of the better receivers gets hurt and goes out, and they bring in the rookie. Quarterback always goes and picks on the rookie cornerback that is guarding the receiver, the new kid that comes in, because they know it's a weak spot. This is a weak spot. When you see that the Comex does not have as much gold and silver in the vaults as they do have paper contracts on written, that's called rehypothecation. It's exactly what the Hunt brothers noticed in 1980. It's exactly what they tried to capitalize on. And quite frankly, I would have bet my bottom dollar that that's exactly what the traders would have done or will attempt to do here. Put the heat on the Comex, push the price up, and expose the fraud that is rehypothecation. If you stand for delivery, that is your right if you own a contract. But when the contracts are so much more in terms of quantity than there are actual bars on the exchange, it sets up for a run on the exchange. It sets up for cash settlement. It sets up for force majeure. It sets up for a price explosion in gold and silver. And at the same time, You see what's going on here geopolitically with the United States pulling out of the World Health Organization today.
I saw that.
Issues going on with China, and these things are just exacerbating what is already a powder keg waiting to blow. And for those of us that have had strong fingertips and have held on for the past decade plus, watching the metals be manipulated, there is only one way to successfully manipulate a market over time, and that is to push it in the direction that it is going. And over the last decade, you could argue the mainstream wouldn't have known a gold coin had it fell on their foot. And so it was easy to hold back the price. When no one wanted gold and silver, they just wanted equities, U.S. denominated equities and bonds. And but that's changing, Chris. I guess, as I mentioned to you off air today, the one thing I notice more than anything right now is mainstream participation, huge mainstream participation, more so than I've ever seen in my career. And so when you put it all together, you have an awakening of sorts into precious metals. You also have an awakening that the Comex market's a fraud. And the traders, I think, are going to try to exploit that. So whether or not it happens this month, next month, or later on this fall, I think the Comex has exposed itself, has shown a kink in the armor. And if I were a trader, certainly that's what I would do. I would stand for delivery. And the more people that do that, very quickly could overwhelm the exchange, drive the price sky high, and maybe even break the exchange altogether. I know that sounds crazy, but I would argue we're setting up for something similar to that type of a backdrop. So I guess only time will tell, but yeah, these are very interesting times, as the Chinese curse says.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's incredible what's going on. You mentioned the 30,000 contracts a couple months ago. I was stunned when I read Craig Hemke's post this morning. I think it's 47,000 contracts. You and I were recording this Friday afternoon, so perhaps people will know a little bit more by the time this is posted on Saturday. But it actually reminded me of one of the other stories this week was U.S. imports record amounts of gold from Switzerland. I don't know. Is that why gold is all of a sudden coming here? The way I've always looked at it is what would you expect the day before it happened or the week before it would happen? And that's what I've been thinking about these past 10 years. And a lot of which seems to be playing out now. But Andy, two last quick ones before. In terms of, you mentioned that whether we go silver for barter or anything like that, what would be, is it the junk silver or people that imagine wanting to trade stuff in a local community? What is the best type to use there?
No question, junk silver. The dimes, quarters, and half dollars minted prior to 1965, in my opinion, without question, are the best choice. And it's interesting, too, because in this industry, normally the greater the utility, the smaller the piece, the higher the premium. That's not the case with junk silver right now. It's a great value, and there are no smaller pieces. There is no other way to have greater utility than to buy the junk silver, and it's recognized, and it's in my opinion, without question, the very best choice right now.
All right. And is junk silver even available right now?
Yes, it is. And we have a fairly decent supply. But, one of the intrigues with junk silver, one of the selling points is that it can't be reproduced. And if the shit hits the fan, Chris, people will flock to it. In 2008, when Obama got elected, and the thought was that we'd see confiscation and that we would see problems with the economy, and the premiums on junk silver went through the roof and disappeared. I think we'll see those days again. So, yes, it is available, but it can't be reproduced. And as a result, it offers, I think, upside potential that you don't really have in other forms of silver typically because of the fact that it can't be reproduced. And so, yes, it's available now. but anything that hasn't been made since 1965 can quickly disappear.
Well, Andy, I sure appreciate that. Appreciate you making some time. And also, folks, if you would like to get any information, pricing, or just have questions about any of the products, Andy has set up Arcadia at milesfranklin.com for our audience, where he will match or beat any price in the country. So with that said, Andy, thanks again for joining me. We'll look forward to catching up next week. Will be interesting to see how this plays out. And for everybody listening at home, if you'd like to know a little bit more about some of the particulars of what Andy was talking about, well, Andrew McGuire was on the show earlier this week, and he was talking about the silver shortage on the wholesale level, and that one is coming your way. So just click here.